Welcome to my presentation on the effects of criminal family members on juvenile delinquency. In this presentation, I will be exploring the effects of criminal family members on the development of children and how this effect can lead to them becoming delinquents later in life. There are many criminological theories that help explain the connection between criminal parents or siblings and juvenile delinquency, some of those being social learning and control theory, which we will be discussing in this presentation. We will also be discussing the effects of incarcerated parents on child development and how the children of parents in prison can lead to delinquency as well. Though there are many factors that lead to juvenile delinquency, one very important factor that we have learned of that is applicable to this research is the factor of the family dynamic. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, in an article on family life and crime, having structured, present, and supporting parents leads to less delinquency, whereas, quote, a child with criminal parents faces a greater likelihood of becoming a delinquent than children with law-abiding parents, end quote. It was also determined that juvenile delinquents were overall more likely to have criminal parents than non-delinquents. This particular article also cites a lack of parental supervision as its main source of development of juvenile delinquency, rather than blatant mimicry of parents' bad behavior. However, as we will discuss in the next slide regarding social learning, that theory does help explain that children can and do mimic their parents' bad behavior. So as we can see, there is a lot of scientific data that shows that children with criminal parents are at greater risks of becoming delinquents, and one major factor is a lack of supervision, which if a parent is preoccupied with engaging in criminal behavior, they are more likely than not going to be able to properly supervise and develop a child as needed. Next, I would like to observe some of the criminological theories that can help explain why children with criminal parents commit crimes, starting with social learning theory. This theory, in summary, explains that juveniles learn to commit crimes from observing those around them, such as their peers, their siblings, or in this case in particular, their parents. As the book Juvenile Delinquency, Causes and Control by Robert Agnew and Timothy Brezina states, quote, juveniles are much more likely to engage in delinquency if intimate others like their friends, parents, and siblings engage in crime, end quote. This theory also explains how a child can come to view criminal behavior as acceptable, since if the juvenile relates to someone who, quote, holds beliefs favorable to delinquency, end quote, they are more likely to view crime as acceptable behavior. It's also important to note that parents who infrequently punish criminal activity while reinforcing criminal activity within their children are setting them up to continue down a path of delinquency. One interesting thing that I have learned was that the reinforcement of delinquent behavior from parents can be either direct or indirect. Direct reinforcement looks like a parent praising or encouraging a child's aggressive or violent behavior, whereas indirect reinforcement can be as simple as rewarding a tantrum. Either method is creating expectations within the child that their bad behavior is rewarded rather than punished. It's also important to note that punishment needs to be enforced frequently, as an infrequency of punishment from intimate relationships can also help cause delinquency. Next, I would like to discuss control theory and how it pertains to this topic of juveniles and criminal family members. Control theory, in summary, theorizes that juveniles commit crimes because they lack direct parental control that would advise them to conform. Having parents that instill proper respect of law and authority, as well as proper moral values, is pivotal in preventing juvenile delinquency. And those children who lack direct parental control and structure in their family life are more likely to become juvenile delinquents, according to Juvenile Delinquency Causes and Control by Robert Agnew and Timothy Brzezina. As one article by the Ministry of Children and Youth Services states, it is proposed that for young people, a key aspect of social control is found within the family, particularly through interactions with and feelings towards parents, end quote. The bond between parent and child is crucial to proper development, and using control theory, we can determine that parents who are criminals have less of an ability to instill a tight familial bond with their children or to enact proper control or restrictions against delinquent behavior. Going back to the study article done by the U.S. Department of Justice, they found on this topic of control that, quote, direct parental control, i.e. rule specification, monitoring, and punishment, are significantly related to delinquency, and also that an improper balance of control has a direct effect on juvenile delinquency. The final criminological theory I'd like to discuss is labeling theory and how it relates to stigmatization of children with criminal or incarcerated parents. Ineffective parenting as a result from criminal behavior has a direct link to who the child may gravitate towards in social settings. Children from households with low control and a social learning for crime are more likely to eventually develop peer relationships with other delinquents, thus exacerbating their delinquent behavior. Children of incarcerated parents also face a harsh stigma against them, which can lead to them being labeled negatively and thus also seeking delinquent peers and carrying out a life of delinquency. From what we've learned about labeling theory, it's the theory that when one is labeled a, quote, bad person or a, quote, criminal, they are more inclined to act as such to fit with the label given. According to an article by Doreen Huschek, quote, for children of arrested, convicted, or incarcerated parents, stigmatization has been extensively reported, end quote. And the, quote, stigma may fuel a self-fulfilling prophecy concurring with labeling explanations, end quote. Let us now discuss the phenomenon of sibling impacts on juvenile delinquency. We've already seen how parental relationships can affect criminal behavior, and the social learning theory can similarly be used when discussing sibling relationships as well. According to a study by Francis P. Abderhallen and Sarah Z. Evans, the dynamic between juvenile siblings is similar to that of peer groups outside the family dynamic, meaning that they can socially learn delinquent behavior from each other. This study also suggests that the blood ties between family members create a deeper social learning experience than those experienced within peers outside of the family, allowing us to theorize that having juvenile siblings does have a greater impact on children than simply them having delinquent friends and spending time with them. In conclusion, we can attest that there are a multitude of different factors that can lead to a child becoming delinquent, but one of the most important is their family dynamic and the relationship they have with their parents, guardians, and siblings. When children are exposed to parents or siblings that are engaging in criminal behavior, they learn from that behavior through social learning theory. And they also often lack the control and restrictions that are needed for healthy development, as stated in control theory. They can also be subject to labeling theory through stigmatization of their family and their background, which can lead to the children seeking companionship in other delinquent children, thus, as mentioned, exacerbating their criminal behavior. Finally, we also learned that the sibling relationship is pivotal to the development of children and their avoidance of juvenile delinquency. As we stated, the sibling relationship has far deeper ties than simply a peer-to-peer relationship.